Hi everyone, you're watching a series of playthrough videos of the game Order and Opportunity, making of the post-Cold War world order. This is currently on the P500 list with GMT Games. And so in the rest of these videos in this series, I'm going to speed up a little bit. So I've been playing the game in the background, and so instead of walking through each turn, I will rather sort of stop and look at highlights of the gameplay. So the first highlight right at the start of the round 2 is the US resolving the ISIS world event here. So they play this card here to use the event option that allows them to resolve a world event as the first card of the first command. So that's where we are. And so what does the US get from this? So first of all, the condition is that you need to have 2 levels of influence, which the US has here using economic influence. The ISIS marker has been reduced down to 1. That was in one of the first videos, and so the US is placed here. Nobody is blocking them, and so the card is discarded. You can see on the card in the bottom row, against sort of green background, you can see various icons. These show what type of influence you can use and the level required to resolve the world event, and then the icons after it show the kind of bonuses or rewards you get. So the yellow icon is, for instance, the victory point icon at this moment. In the design, 2 victory points seems like about the right amount, but we'll see. The design process is about adjusting the rewards and incentives the right way. And there's the RC icon. We encountered this, I think, in a previous video, which it stands for regime change. So if military influence is used, that is the cube piece type, to resolve this, then regime change is an option. Well, the US is using economic influence, so no regime change there. So they just get the 2 victory points, which we mark here on the victory point track. So US is pulling ahead at this point. We discard the world event and we discard the card. An interesting effect worth paying attention to of the US resolving the world event is that the pivotal event in the Middle East moves a little closer to completion. So each time anything is resolved in the region, in this case the Middle East, which is these 3 spaces here, the resolving power may decide to move the pivotal event marker either 1 step closer to getting resolved, or then 1 step further away, depending on how they judge the situation. And when the pivotal event reaches first the space 2 here and then sort of exits the track, then the pivotal event effect is resolved, and that is the region is scored. So we will then look at each the theater is scored, and we will look at each region, for instance Levant here, and see whether anyone's got control there of any kind. The game recognizes 3 kinds of control depending on the piece type that is controlling the space. During the Chinese turn, something potentially later on consequential happened, namely here in Asia Pacific. China is using 1 card to take and, so to speak, an off-suit action. They use a security suit card to increase their political influence. This can be done, but the cost is 1 resource, which we deduct here on the records track. So this puts China in an interesting situation. So they can play then the second military suit card to bring their first military influence into the space. There's a little complication to the authoritarian powers. If we look here on the Chinese player mat, they may place military influence as indicated in the boxes here on the player mat of the influence that they are placing. So the first influence of China, for instance, has to go into China on adjacent space. So Asia Pacific is adjacent to China itself. And the second rule about placing military influence of the authoritarian powers such as China is that they must already control the space by some other type of influence. Well, that's what China just did with the first card. They established political control in Asia Pacific, and now with the second card they may bring in the military influence. And now the situation emerges that China and the US both have military influence in Asia Pacific, and this constitutes in the game terms a situation of strategic posture contestation. So China is effectively challenging the US military posture in this region. This will result later on during a globalization phase in a strategic posture contest. So essentially a die roll will be made by both sides, modified by resources spent, and then at stake is potentially the US, the democracies, in general, if it's NATO is targeted, or here in this case only the US, losing a victory point. So this represents historically sort of the upper hand position, that the hegemonic position that democracies, the US in particular, sort of has enjoyed in the post-Cold War period, but that is arguably gradually coming under stress and being challenged by aspiring powers such as China. And so this is the point in the Chinese move here to perhaps cause a victory point loss to the United States. At the start of the next round of play, the third round, EU is then once again getting active, placing here a reaction ability into Africa to be able to react to their own, or rather Russian moves, passing them quickly also, so that Russia, if they try something, EU is in the position to react and defend their commanding position in Africa. Another opportunity has been resolved here in East and Central Africa, also by the EU, which brings the pivotal event dangerously close to being resolved. In a further twist to the story, the US is also getting involved in West Africa, bringing the economic influence there to 2, so taking advantage of West African opportunities next turn then. And so meanwhile the pivotal event marker is already very close to completion and getting triggered. As a further twist to the story, not in Africa but in general, the War of Ideas check card has been drawn, and this is a card that causes potentially the War of Ideas mark and the track to move. So what we are looking at here is levels of tension. So, for instance, here in the Middle East, we have tension in every space, but not quite enough to cause any changes in the War of Ideas. So to destabilize and cause regions to move towards authoritarianism, it is close, and there's potentially a big change coming, but it's not quite yet at the time of this War of Ideas check that has now come at a good time for the democracies. Namely, here in the Baltic states we can see there's a civil society marker at level 2, which is enough to cause governance change here in the Baltic states. So the Baltic states are embracing democracy. Civil society activism is helping in that process. And so here we go to the War of Ideas track. We adjust the marker here, the governance level marker, 1 step further towards the democratic end. So during a previous video, the marker already moved here from the center to the first space due to a regime change that I believe was that happened via resolving a world event. And now this War of Ideas check shifts the marker another space, and this means now that both democracies score 1 victory point each. So here's a little interesting bit from the Chinese turn. So it's the Africa pivotal event is closest to scoring over here, and so there's a little bit of a rush to get in position in Africa from every power. The EU has cleverly placed here the reaction ability, exercising some regulatory impact on the African markets and whoever may be engaged there. So At this moment, the EU is very well positioned here, scoring a victory point in North Africa and East and Central Africa as well. Here in West Africa will be a tie, and this is an interesting tie because in order to trigger this pivotal event here, this opportunity is the closest thing to making it happen. That is, if this opportunity is resolved and removed from the map, then the pivotal and the scoring will occur. At the moment, the US and the EU are both in the position to resolve the opportunity but are blocking each other. So one of them has to agree to lift the block, receive a so-called legacy point, which is sort of a half a victory point worth, as it were, in return, but still it has to be agreed, and the question is whether the US player actually would agree, given that the EU is in such a strong scoring position in Africa. So there's a little bit of a interesting situation happening there, but meanwhile it's the Chinese turn, so they play 2 political cards, get 1 level of terror threat as the consequence, and then swoop in with political influence here into Central Africa. This does not trigger the EU reaction, which is only to, as we saw earlier, the card, it's only to economic and cultural actions. So this is, so to speak, a safe play, and then pulls even here with the EU. So blocking situation happening there. And it's the Russian turn. Then on the round 3 they play some military suit cards, suffer here a reduction on the world order track, and I think in a previous video I was explaining the rules about this a little bit. So at this moment the EU and the US are upholding the rules-based world order by staying high enough on the track. That means that if any authoritarian power should sink here down to low, which Russia has just done as a consequence of playing those 2 military suit cards, then they are subject to the -1 resource penalty. And then they go on and use one of the military cards in Russia itself. So this is another one of those off-suit uses, so they increase their political effort there in the Russian Federation to get in place to resolve Chechnya world event, but because they do an off-suit action, they don't play a political suit card but a military suit card to increase political influence, then they must pay one resource, so they're going down to 0. In this game you can also go down into debt, and there is however a debt check card that may come out at random, or comes out at random, and so there's a little risk involved in going into debt. With the second card, the Russians take actually a military action here in North Africa, so they pull the EU influence there down 1 level. This places a tension marker into the space, and then decreases the Russian influence the Russian contribution on the world order track by 1. It cannot go below 1, but the resource penalty is still applied, so it's applied again. Russia goes into in debt. As a reaction to the Russian political action in the Russian Federation in Chechnya, the Chinese get a reaction here and increase their economic influence all the way to 3, so they establish a firm position in the European Union for Europe scoring purposes. Then the US turn, so the US and the EU are working to address the Bin Laden world event here. They have a good reason for doing so, because if the world event card here remains unresolved until the globalization phase, which is only 1 round away, then the red part of the card will be applied. That means both democracies will receive 1 level of terror threat increased on their player mat, and then they will lose 1 victory point each. So it's quite a costly thing to let that card remain there. So but the alliance is on the case here as a NATO military influence, and they are using the military influence now to try to get rid of the Bin Laden world event. The US has just played a military card to that effect. On top of that, the US will get a reaction with the card here to military actions, so may increase their political influence by one, which they do in Levant, pulling ahead there, taking control in the space. Finally, China has another go, discarding their opportunity market there for an additional command, and playing People's Liberation Army here in Asia Pacific, where we have the strategic contest coming up during the globalization phase. Each level of influence gives a +1 to the die roll, so it's a good idea if you can to increase the military influence there ahead of that strategic contest.